With the release of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, we officially have 32 feature-length films in this franchise to rank, from the dumpster fires to the cinematic masterpieces. So let's find out which spot this one clocks in at. Keep in mind, before anybody gets weirdly butthurt by my list, just remember that these are my opinions that are based specifically on my taste of film. Even then, the MCU overall has a pretty solid track record with their quality, so even some films a lot lower on this list, I would still consider good movies. Quick rant aside, I'm gonna try to keep this as short and concise as I can for you because, well, people have shit to do. So let's stop wasting your time and start with the absolute bum of this franchise. So starting at the bottom of the barrel, number 32 is Thor: The Dark World. I doubt that it's controversial to say that this is widely considered the weakest film in the MCU. I mean, there are elements that are uniquely filmed and have a solid direction and a really good use of its budget. It just feels so boring and lackluster to get through. Thor doesn't have his typical charm here. It has an extremely forgettable villain. I just don't understand what happened while making this. It's easily the bottom of the list. Now for my number 31, Captain Marvel. Okay, it's not the easiest thing to explain. I just couldn't buy into the structure of how they told her story. The sequences where they have Captain Marvel on Earth in the 90s with a young Nick Fury is always a good time, but the villain is so forgettable, and I don't think Brie Larson brings enough of her usual charisma to this character at all. Not to say that she won't in the future, but we'll just have to see. This one just doesn't work for me. Coming in at number 30 is the original Thor. So the first entry in the Thor franchise is not bad by any means. It's just not super rewatchable. The fish out of water plot is fine, but I feel like the runtime would have been much better spent in Asgard, more because of how beautiful Kenneth Branagh as a director managed to make it look. That entire frost giant fight is still awesome, and it holds up really well for me. I just wish we got more of that in here. Now into my number 29, Iron Man 2. This one is genuinely fun as hell to me. It's too bad it's just an absolute train wreck of plot holes from trying to rush everything to set up the Avengers. Whiplash, Justin Hammer, and Black Widow are all amazing additions to this movie, but it failed to give them any of the screen time they actually deserve. I know they rushed you, Jon Favreau. Coming in at number 28, Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's basically just an upbeat palate cleanser from that traumatizing ending we got in Infinity War. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a solid, wacky, middle-of-the-road superhero comedy that just shows what Ant-Man was up to during the events of literally everybody else except him going to war with Thanos. Number 27, Black Widow. Man, if only that third act could have lived up to the awesome pace and dynamic that the first two acts had. It's just a weak, over-the-top, CGI-heavy third act with a not-so-great version of that villain Taskmaster. But Florence Pugh and David Harbour were both perfect casting, and they carry the movie as much as they can, easily overshadowing Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow in her own fucking movie. I mean, the scenes with them are the most memorable aspects of this one by far. At number 26, Captain America: The First Avenger. Okay, let me just say that I didn't really get into Captain America as a character until Winter Soldier. I understand the purpose of his story and what he represents, but it just didn't work for me. Looking back on it though, I've actually really grown to appreciate the action sequences, his origin story, Hugo Weaving as Red Skull, the chemistry between Steve and Peggy. I mean, watching this film after having seen Endgame, I can easily say that their timeline is my favorite love story in the entire MCU. Coming in at number 25, The Incredible Hulk. It might be crazy to say that Ed Norton is my favorite Hulk, so I won't say it, but I implied it. And I don't care what anybody says, this is in no way, shape, or form a bad entry. It just doesn't really fit in with the aesthetic of what the MCU is known for now. So looking back on it might seem jarring, and sure the script is a little bit lacking, but it still has my all-time favorite Hulk fight, and a badass villain in Tim Roth. Come on. My number 24 is Eternals. This one would have been much higher if it wasn't so overstuffed. It definitely should have been made as a series instead so they could really flesh out each of the Eternals more, but I don't think it's nearly as bad as people made it out to be. There's a ton of great character moments, gorgeous cinematography, great acting all across the board. It just needed better pacing, but I do like this movie. My number 23 is Iron Man 3. It's so much better than it gets credit for. I mean, a Shane Black film inside the MCU feels a bit off-putting, but not because it's bad, but because his style is so damn distinct. So naturally, as a big fan of his movies like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and The Nice Guys, I really enjoyed the way he handles Tony Stark and where he's at mentally, and how he finds the perfect moments to add that right amount of humor. Also, the Mandarin twist doesn't really bother me the way it does everybody else, but I will say that Guy Pearce as Killian is probably one of the more forgettable villains here. Moving on to number 22, please don't execute me, Black Panther. I'd say rankings are based mostly on rewatchability, and this is just one I'm never too eager to put back on. I completely appreciate the cultural impact of it. I adore the soundtrack, and Killmonger is an absolute scene stealer of a villain, no doubt. But the action just doesn't really hit for me like that. Especially not in the CGI-filled third act. I just think it didn't age super well. But all that being said, Chadwick Boseman absolutely slayed this role. R.I.P. by the way. And at my number 21, Thor: Love and Thunder. I know. Just let me explain. On a technical level, I think Black Panther is better filmmaking, but I just cannot help adoring how quirky and vibrant this movie is. Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher is a top-tier villain, but once again, he just doesn't get enough character development. The whole Lady Thor plot was surprisingly not corny to me at all. I think that it created the chemistry between Thor and Jane that these movies actually desperately needed. It has quite a few bizarre and dumb choices, and Taika Waititi shoved in a good amount of jokes that just did not land for me at all, but I still had a pretty good time with it. Clocking in at number 20, Avengers: Age of Ultron. I will never understand the hate that this one gets. I mean, no shit, if you're comparing this to the other 3 Avenger movies, it's definitely the worst, but just on its own, it's an awesome team-up movie. I mean, you have Iron Man and Hulk duking it out and demolishing a city in the process. The introduction to probably my favorite character overall in Wanda. And having Tony Stark accidentally create a vicious robot that mirrors his own stubborn arrogance. What a fucking plot. And I can't forget the iconic scene of them all just hanging out together trying to lift Thor's hammer. I mean, it's not a perfect movie, but there's just so many top tier moments. And for my number 19, if I wasn't canceled already, then I'm about to be. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. I know that it's blasphemy to have this one this low. I genuinely think if I were to rewatch it right now, I might change my opinion completely. But I just don't think it hits as hard for me as Volume 2 does. I love the introduction to these characters overall. They were all so well cast, and James Gunn infuses that perfect blend of humor and action between them. But I think Ronan the Accuser is just such a boring villain, to be honest. I mean, I still liked it a lot overall, but I don't know, maybe I'll give it another try. And at number 18, I have Ant-Man. This one's just so damn unique. I was all in the second they announced Paul Rudd as a superhero. The guy has too much personality to not star in a movie like this. Obviously, the scale isn't huge, but because of that, I feel like it makes it more grounded and accessible. And Michael Pena plays hands down one of the greatest comic relief characters ever on screen. Paul Rudd has amazing chemistry with both Evangeline Lilly and Michael Douglas. And the villain here, Darren Cross, is good enough. Number 17, I'm cheating a little bit here, but Werewolf by Night. Why? Why could this not have been a feature length? The classic early Hollywood style of horror is masterfully recreated here. The aesthetic is on point overall, and the actors play into that style of film so freaking well. I would really love for Marvel to dive more into these areas. My honest to God only issue with it is it was just way too short. But my number 16 is the new kid on the block, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I understand, it's messy and it definitely has a tough time balancing its tones, but it does embrace its own quirkiness and it leans into it hard, so that right there is already going to work for some and not for others. And I can acknowledge all the obvious issues with it, but I'd be lying to myself if I said I wasn't entertained the whole way through. I appreciate the bizarre sci-fi creatures and settings that they used. Jonathan Majors proves himself to be a terrifyingly manipulative villain as Kang the Conqueror. Every time that he spoke, he had me on the edge of my seat. And if you didn't like it, I don't know what to tell you. I appreciated what they went for. And at number 15, Marvel's The Avengers. If we're just talking achievements in film alone, this would have been top 3. This was the first successful superhero team-up movie, and it's definitely the reason why something like Endgame was even possible to make. It changed the game completely. The chemistry between them all is incredible, along with Loki as the main villain and that iconic third act fight. I still adore this one overall, but I think some aspects of it don't age as well as some of the ones higher on this list. At number 14, Doctor Strange. Absolutely the most slept on film on the list. The trippy mirror dimension sequences look unbelievable. I really dig Strange's origin story. How he finds the Ancient One and becomes a sorcerer. For me, it's just one of the most memorable out of them. The only thing keeping this out of my top 10 is that damn underdeveloped villain. I don't even remember his name. Cassette player, Cassandra, Crustaceans, whatever. But that third act fight against Dormammu was freaking bussin'. At number 13, I've got Spider-Man: Homecoming. I'll openly admit I slept on this one hard when it first came out. Once I finally got to it, I understood the hype behind Tom Holland as the new Spider-Man. I really love that it pulls from the John Hughes era of high school movies. It's quirky, it's upbeat, it's hilarious. At least until you get to the scenes with Michael Keaton as the Vulture that are just fucking terrifying. I think it was a really smart choice to just skip over the origin in a way and get right into the Spider-Man quirks that we know and love. Just above that at number 12, Spider-Man Far From Home. Yeah, I know, I prefer Far From Home to Homecoming. Sue me. I mean, it's literally by a smidge, though. I just think the Mysterio illusions are some of the coolest sequences in the entire MCU. Jake Gyllenhaal was a perfect casting for how well he's able to balance being charming and psychotic. Also, the chemistry between Peter and MJ is top tier here, and the humor actually works for me all the way through. I don't know what to tell you. But number 11 is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Man, I'm a freaking sucker for original kung fu movies, and that's exactly what this is. It takes a ton of inspiration from classic kung fu films and icons, but it feels more like an ode to it than a ripoff. The villain motivation is extremely relatable. All of the martial arts sequences are expertly crafted, and after just one film, I'm gonna say that Shang-Chi is probably my favorite of the newer heroes. Finally cracking my top 10, I'm going with Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I understand that it's not a fast-paced film. It's pretty slow-moving at parts, but I mean the love that Ryan Coogler put into this project completely overshadows the pacing issues. It's such a beautiful tribute to the passing of both Chadwick Boseman and T'Challa in the story. The acting all around was phenomenal, given that Angela Bassett officially has the first Oscar nomination in the MCU, so let that speak for itself. Also, Namor is a relatable but still very threatening villain. They just fleshed out the characters and the story here so well. Good fucking job. Moving along to my number 9, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Look, I love what I love. I don't need to explain. Okay, I'll explain. Typically when I watch movies, there's always a small part of me that's in critic mode, but this is one of the exceptions. No matter how many people I hear mention how flawed this movie is, I just cannot notice it. I love Kurt Russell as Ego. I love the twist about Star-Lord's mom. I love this soundtrack even more than the first one, and it's honestly one of the most wild and enjoyable third acts I've ever seen. At number 8, I've got Avengers Infinity War. Oh my god, the backstory of Thanos and Gamora, the Russo brothers finding a way to humanize Thanos even though we know he's a threat to our heroes, the chemistry between all of our Avengers, and one of the best executed cliffhangers in history. At this point, it's just based on rewatchability and personal preference alone. All the movies from here on up, I'd say, are near perfect, if not so. Number 7, Captain America Civil War. Honest to God, just go find all your action figures from when you were a kid and just fucking mash them all together, and that's the movie pretty much. You've got the Avengers basically split down the middle between the side of Iron Man or Captain America while introducing Spider-Man and Black Panther into the MCU for the first time. Also, I appreciate how original Baron Zemo is as a villain that doesn't even actually have any powers or tech, just a dude motivated to pull strings to tear the Avengers apart. I loved that. Number 6 is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Maybe I'm biased, maybe I know nothing, and maybe I have brain damage. I don't know. Because this was one of the coolest things I've ever experienced in a comic book film. Easily. Sam Raimi is just my kind of director, and this movie gave me everything I could have possibly asked for with him behind the camera. Wanda plays by far the most terrifying villain in the MCU, because you can understand her motives and where she's coming from, and having the Darkhold tap into that trauma of hers was just genius. The Evil Dead style camera movements, the Scarlet Witch being a freaking mix of the Ring, a Deadite, and a Terminator, zombie Doctor Strange forming a cape out of fucking demons, and the stunning special effects. I had absolutely no complaints. Kicking it back to the very beginning of the franchise with my number 5, Iron Man. The first entry in the MCU still holds up so unbelievably well. This movie is probably one of the biggest reasons why superhero films can appeal to such broad audiences at all these days. They just humanize Tony Stark so well that when he hits that transitional growth period in his arc, you fully buy into it. Man, Robert Downey Jr. revived his entire career with this one, and it's easy to see why. But at my number 4, I got Spider-Man No Way Home. Should I bother even explaining this placement? All they had to do was give me that Tobey Maguire cameo. Not only did they give us 3 eras of Spider-Man, but they were actually pivotal to the plot in the third act. They gave us the best Spider-Man villains, the best acting out of Tom Holland by far, the payoff of the 3 movies altogether being his actual origin story, even a Doctor Strange mirror dimension sequence. It has it all for me, fam. Cracking my top 3 is Captain America Winter Soldier. This movie had no right having this much swag. The overall aesthetic is so cool and unique, the action sequences are off the freaking charts, and how much further they develop Cap in just this one movie alone showed that the Russo brothers had to really take it there to make their mark, and spoiler alert, they fucking did. But my number 2 is Thor Ragnarok. This one just freaking hits different, man. Every single bit of the humor works for me. Kate Blanchett as Hela is one of my favorite MCU villains. She steals every single scene she shows up in. The dynamic between Thor, Hulk, Loki, and Valkyrie is just so entertaining to watch, while even adding uniquely wacky side characters like Korg and the Headmaster. It's just arguably the most rewatchable one on this whole list. And we finally made it to the number 1 spot, and you can probably guess what it is based on process of elimination, but my favorite MCU movie as of right now is Avengers Endgame. I just don't even know if anything can beat this theater experience. I don't have to explain to you how big the scale was here. Arguably the best action-packed third act of all time, the best use of cinematic time travel, and even closing out both Iron Man and Captain America's arcs perfectly. The Russo brothers set the freaking standard for how an Avengers movie should be, and so both Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars have a goddamn high bar set for them. So make sure to comment down below if I pissed you off, and if so, if your list is that much better, feel free to comment it below if you have the guts. Thank you for taking the time to watch my weird ass talk about movies for far too long. If you enjoy this type of content from me, let me know by subscribing and liking the video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace.